Having looked at various implementations of the first in, first out queue, let's now consider one application and then discuss the implementation used by the Java Collection Framework. We begin with the UML diagram of the application that we have chosen to illustrate the use of a first in, first out queue. It is a variation on the maze search example that we used to illustrate recursion. In the previous version, recursion was used to perform a depth-first search. In this version, a first in, first out queue will be used to do a breadth-first search. Because most of the program is the same as before, the common components are not shown here. Instead, we have illustrated the various implementations of the first in, first out queue that we have discussed. The breadth maze class replaces the depth maze class in the previous version. Recall that the approach that we have taken is to supply the search method to the maze. The search method uses the linked queue. However, the reference is QInterface, which guarantees that we could substitute either of the other two implementations and the program will still compile and run properly. The one aspect of this version that is of most interest is the search method that makes use of the first in, first out queue. Recall that search with a capital S is a functional interface, and we are defining here, and what we are defining here is a named lambda expression called search with a lowercase s. It is passed the maze to search and the starting location. We instantiate the first in, first out queue at the beginning. Notice that the reference type is the interface type QInterface, as we previously mentioned. To get the search started, we enqueue the starting location. The search will continue until the queue is empty or until the goal is found. We dequeue the current location, which becomes the next move of the search. Unlike the depth-first search, all moves are considered forward moves, because with the breadth-first search there is no backtracking. The list of moves that is assembled during the search is then used to animate the maze search. Then we check whether the location is the goal location. Recall that this method will throw an exception if the goal is found, which will end the search. In a breadth-first search, all the neighbors are visited first, and then the neighbors' neighbors, and so on. So we fill an array with the 4 neighbors, and use a for loop to add all those neighbors to the first in, first out queue if the neighbors are visitable. Recall that being visitable means that the square is in the maze, it is not blocked, and it hasn't already been visited. So now let's run this version. And again, as before, the black squares are the block squares. The yellow square is the one that we are searching for. So pressing the search button, the blue squares are the current location, the gray squares are what's been visited, but notice the order was very different from before. So now we were visiting neighbors, neighbors' neighbors, and so on. Now let's consider how first in, first out queues are implemented in the Java Collection Framework. The Java queue interface is what we would have used as the reference type for our queue in the maze example had we elected to use the queue Java provides. Its method names are somewhat different though, and Java provides 2 choices for each operation. The methods that correspond to what we called enqueue are offer and add. The difference between these 2 methods is that offer returns false if the queue if NQ fails on a size-restricted queue, whereas add throws an illegal state exception in that case. The methods that correspond to what we called dequeue are poll and remove. The difference between these methods is similar to the other two. If the queue is empty, poll returns null. By contrast, remove throws a no such element exception. Although we have provided 3 possible implementations for the purpose of comparison, Java only includes one implementation. It is the linked list class, which implements the queue interface. It is similar to our linked queue implementation, except it uses a doubly linked list. It is the only implementation because using a linked list is preferable to using an array list. The reason is that although an array list could be made circular to avoid shifting, the underlying representation is a fixed size array, which would need to be copied when it became full. Linked lists simply grow one node at a time as needed. Unlike the stack, there's no need for an actual queue class, provided the reference type is declared as queue. Although the linked list class has methods that allow insertions in the middle, defining the reference type as queue rather than linked list would prohibit such use. This is an example of the importance of programming to an interface rather than an implementation. We conclude with an explanation of the difference between singly and doubly linked lists. We already noted that the Java linked list class uses a doubly linked list. As the name suggests, a doubly linked list has 2 links, one to the previous element and another to the next element. As a result, it also implements the DEC interface, which defines a double-ended queue. It allows adding or removing from both ends in constant time and backward traversals. With a doubly linked list, there are typically both a head and tail reference. Although doubly linked lists have several benefits, they are more complicated to implement. An insertion into the list requires reconnecting pointers in both directions. Also, unless a compression technique is used, each node will now require additional memory because there are 2 links.